All right, let's take a look at the fabrics that we're going to need. I have chosen this lovely piece of cork with a little bit of gold fleck in there. Isn't that fun? With this as my contrasting fabric. I have chosen this fabric as my lining, and I have learned from past mistakes to always make my lining a light color. If you use a dark color lining, it's very difficult to see what's in your bag. So I've just chosen a tone-on-tone beige. For my thread colors, I have chosen this as probably the one that I'm going to use. I have this really pretty little variegated that it has a lot of the same colors as the cork, which I may or may not use, but just in case I've got it pulled. The only problem with using a variegated thread, if it stitches a satin stitch, it stitches out as a stripe. And I might like that, I might not. So I've got this here just in case. Of course, I have just regular embroidery thread for my bobbin. I have cutaway stabilizer, and about a medium weight cutaway stabilizer. I have some Wonder Tape for hooping. Now the size of the bag that I'm making is the bigger size. The biggest, there's 3 sizes to choose from. I'm making the biggest one. So I need my 200 by 360 hoop. I also have my hoop clips, which I will explain later. And I will need some hardware. So I've got a couple of D-rings, a couple of swivel sliders, a snap. And I'm not 100% certain yet if I'm going to put a slider in my strap. I just might. So I've got a slider there just in case. You are also going to need some batting. So I have some scrap batting here. You need 4 pieces of batting, and that should get us going. I will also have a printed copy of the instructions, or I will put it on my iPad so that I have them right beside the embroidery machine. Take your hardware, put it off to the side. You won't need it for a while. And we also won't need to deal with the lining fabric for a while either. We won't cut this until we have the rest of the bag stitched out, and then we will cut our lining. But until then, we're just going to leave that. We'll put that off to the side. Next thing we need to do is get some of our fabric pre-cut. So with this bag, there are 2 sides. There's side A and side B. And side A, the cork is the background, and the fabric is going to be the patch. And on side B, this fabric is going to be background, and the cork is going to be the patch. And then there's the leaves to stitch out, and they will be a mixture of both on both bags. So we do need to cut some of our fabric in advance. Now you need to make 2 side A and 2 side Bs. So I will need 2 10 by 14 inch pieces of the cork for side A, and 2 5.5 by 10 pieces of patch for side A. And side B, I will need 2 10 by 14 pieces of background and 2 5.5 by 10 pieces of cork. Now you do need to remember I am making the bigger bag. You will need to look at the instructions if you are making anything other than the largest bag, and that will tell you what size to cut your fabric. Just remember that side A, this is the background with this being the patch, and side B, this is the background with that being the patch. So go ahead and cut your fabrics, and then we'll get ready to hoop up. Now I have everything cut, ready to go. So now it's time to prepare the hoop. I have cut my stabilizer, and this is, remember, this is a cutaway stabilizer. It's a little hard to see, but it's there. That's stabilizer. And I want to make sure that this stabilizer just doesn't move. So I'm going to do a couple of extra precautions. I am taking some Wonder Tape, and Wonder Tape is just a double-sided tape. And I'm going to put a piece all the way around the back side of my inner hoop. And this will grip the stabilizer just a little bit better, because you'll see that my stabilizer is just barely wider than my hoop. So I want to make sure that it is completely stable. Let's move this one away for a minute. There we go. I've put the Wonder Tape all the way around on the underside of my inner hoop. And now I just need to take off the paper backing. And sometimes that gets a little tricky. It doesn't want to come off. So if it doesn't want to come off, I just give it a score line with a pin, and off it comes. So this Wonder Tape leaves just a little sticky piece of tape all the way across the inside of my hoop, which will allow better stability with the stabilizer. So now I'm going to take my hoop, my inner hoop, and just place it down, centering it on top of my stabilizer. Give that a little tack down, and then the stabilizer sticks to the inner hoop, so I can just hoop it up. So I'll grab my outer hoop again, Just plop that down, tighten it up, and snug it with the screw. Now we want to make sure that we're hooped nice and tight, and because my stabilizer is really not ideally wide enough, it will cover. You can see that I've got some stabilizer hanging over the top of the hoop. I'm also going to use my little hoop clips, and they are just an added extra stability to stop the stabilizer from popping out. As the design is stitching, it pulls everything in. This will stop the stabilizer from moving. So I'm going to apply my hoop clips all the way around. Now, if you don't happen to have hoop clips, you can also take a pin and stick a pin through the stabilizer just like that, and that will also stop the stabilizer from creeping in as the design stitches out. Next step is off to the embroidery machine. This is exciting. Okay, here I am at my machine. I have put in a brand new embroidery needle. I'm threaded up with the color of thread that I want to use. I have my hoop clipped in, got my hoop clips on, and I am all ready to go. The first step is to put your piece of batting on top of your stabilizer and just let that stitch out. Now, if you wanted to have a lay down first before you put your batting down, just to make sure you had everything covered, you can just stitch out color number 1 twice. But if you have the batting covering the hoop, you will be fine and you won't have to worry about it. So let her stitch. Now we are going to take this off and trim around the batting. Now we want to trim the batting nice and close to the stitch outline here without cutting into the stitch line. Try to get about 1 to 2 millimeters away and trim away all that excess batting. Just be careful that you don't cut into your stitch line. There we go, and if you've got any little bits sticking out, you can just go ahead and trim them off. And then back to the embroidery machine. Now, step number 2, we are ready to lay down our piece of cork or whatever fabric you're using for this part, the background part of the design. Lay that down on top of your hoop and make sure that you have all the stitch line covered and you are ready to go. As it's stitching here, all I'm doing is just smoothing it to make sure it stays in place. Now when we do this trim, we want to leave all this extra fabric in the seam allowance. We just want to trim away the patch. So I'm just going to go in here and trim it away within 1 to 2 millimeters of the stitch line. Now you'll save this piece of fabric because you can use that for the leaves. There we go. Just trim that away. Step number 3 is going to be the placement line for the patch. Now, stitch number 4, you're going to take your fabric for your patch and lay it down, making sure that you have the stitch lines covered up, and lay that down, and then go ahead and stitch out number 4. Now we are going to go ahead and trim around the patch, but make sure you leave this fabric in the seams. We don't want to take that out yet, so we're just going to trim this patch part right here. Okay, we're going to trim around the patch right here, but leave all this excess fabric in the seam allowance. We don't want to take that off just yet. And you want to get to within 1 to 2 millimeters. Nice and close. We are going to do a nice little decorative stitch that's going to cover that up, but we don't want to see this fabric sticking out from underneath our decorative stitch. once you get that off, if there's bits sticking out like up here, you can go back and just trim that off. I think I can get a little bit closer over here too. There we go. Back to the embroidery machine. Okay, this next stitch, which is color change number 5, is going to do a decorative stitch around the edge of the patch that we've just trimmed away. So you want to make sure that this is the color of thread that you want to use, and it's going to be a satin stitch. And it is going to take approximately 4 minutes to stitch out. So I'm going to turn the video off while it stitches out. I'll just get her started. Now I'm about maybe a third of the way through this stitch, and the embroidery machine has stitched here, and it's given me the outline of where the satin stitch is going to be. So I'm just going to take a quick peek and just make sure I don't have any fabric sticking out from this stitch line that I don't want showing, and everything looks good. So we're going to start it back up again. There, now that is a very pretty satin stitch, and don't worry about this little gap. It's supposed to be there. There's going to be a leaf covering that up. Now stitch color number 6 is going to be the placement stitch on the background for all of the leaves. So I'm just leaving in the same color of thread, and off we go. Well, I guess I'm going to stand a little bit corrected. It did not stitch down on the background. It stitched down on my fabric patch with a little bit up here. You'll see there's a couple of leaves stitched out up here. Well, I want these ones to be cork, these leaves here to be cork, but I don't want this one to be cork. So what I'm going to do is take the patch that I cut out from here of the cork, and I'm going to lay that down for this part, and then I'm going to lay a piece of my fabric up here for this leaf. Now this leaf that is stitched out right here, I want it to be out of fabric. So I fussy cut a piece of fabric from my batik, and making sure that all those leaves are covered up like so, double check, and then I am ready to let her go. Now, after I stitch out this right here, I'm actually going to then have to stop the machine and trim away a little bit of the cork, because this tiny corner of the cork is over top of my stitch out line. So I will stop it once I have finished stitching out this leaf. I'm just going to pull the hoop out a little bit so it's easier for me to get at, and just stitch away a little bit of that cork. That's better. Now I want to make sure my piece of fabric is right where I want it to be. And I do want this kind of dark part of the fabric to be in the leaf. So I am just going to hold it down there with my fingers while it stitches it out. Now we need to trim away this excess fabric. I've kind of zoomed in so you can see where one of the leaves are, and I am just going to trim away that excess fabric. And again, I want to be about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters away, and that will be covered up by a decorative stitch. So this is what it's going to look like before we head back to the sewing machine. There we are. I've trimmed around all the leaves, and we are now ready to do step number 8. So step number 8 is going to do the satin stitch around the leaves. It's going to do the stem, and it is going to do some veins on the leaves. So this is about a 17-minute stitch out. So I'm going to get it started, and then I'm going to turn off the video, and we will pick it back up again when it is finished. Once again, I'm just leaving my gold thread in there. I'm not making any changes at this point to my thread color. Oh, that is so pretty. Okay, stitch number 9. Now we are going to do the placement stitches for the leaves on the cork background, and it is only about a 1-minute stitch out. And again, I'm going to leave the same thread color in there. I don't feel the need to change. Okay, So now we are at stitch number 10, and you are going to take your piece of fabric that you have decided to make those leaves out of and just place that over top, making sure that you have covered all the stitch area, and off we go. There, now that that's done, you're going to take your hoop out and we are going to trim away all the excess fabric from around the leaves without cutting into our stitches. And again, you want to be about 1 to 2 millimeters away from all those leaves. Once you are satisfied with that you are close enough, back to the sewing machine. All right, and stitch number 11 is going to do the decorative stitch all the way around the outside of the leaves and the veins and the stem. So it is about a 14-minute stitch out. Again, I'm not going to change my thread color because I kind of like how that gold is looking against the cork, and I'm just going to let it stitch out. Now I'm just going to remove my clips. Okay. That is so pretty. Now we just want to trim this off about a ½ inch past the stitch outline because we want to make sure we maintain a seam allowance. There. Once all that excess is trimmed away, here you now have, let's just zoom out so you can see it. Oop, wrong way. There. That is one of section A. Now you need to make another one of these, exact same as this, and then we need to make 2 B's. So go ahead and make one more of these. So here we go. I have my 2 side A's stitched out. Now we need to stitch out 2 side B's. And it's going to be exactly the same process, except you're going to substitute these 2 fabrics. So where I used cork, I'm going to use my fabric, and where I used fabric, I'm going to use my cork. So that's the only change that you make to stitching out your 2 side B's. Then after your side B's are stitched out, that's when we will assemble the bag and cut our lining and make our strap.